Hey Brian, I just finished your presentation on GPS and how it actually works, and I wanted to give you some feedback or criticisms. Take them however you like, but I mean no malice, no disrespect or anything like that. I appreciate your work and efforts as a researcher and a content creator. So don't please don't take offense. Or I'm not trying to start a war or anything, right? Like that, right? So um, while I was listening to your presentation, I realized that a large majority of your presentation can be undermined. Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to scroll down. It can be undermined by the fact that GPS is a time interval system that uses a range measurement equation and a preferred reference frame. Because the way that you're trying to equate the distance transformations between coordinate systems is that the distance would change because if the original distance is taken from a plane and then you're transferring that onto a curve. Obviously, the distance discrepancy is going to be shown in the way that the coordinate system, diverges and converges away um, to maintain sphericity, right, on the new system. So the actually GPS kind of solved well, didn't kind of it GPS solved that by the way it actually functions, being it uses a range measurement equation in an ECI reference frame, which is the preferred reference frame for which it derives the distance. But anyway, what they're doing is they're basically taking an accurate down to the millimeter for distance derived, an accurate measurement of the speed of light and how it varies based on the observer, right? So what they found is that electromagnetic waves propagating west to east east to west travel faster, and when they're traveling in the opposite direction, they travel slower. In addition to that, the velocity of the GPS signal recipient is needs to be accounted for as well. So, in the delay in which they receive their propagation is directly proportional to their velocity, right? So in this example right here, let's say R1 is a stationary GPS signal receiver and R2 is a moving signal receiver traveling 30 miles an hour, right? And we have a stationary GPS source here to emit the signal, and we have a moving one here. Now, either one doesn't matter if these two are moving or stationary. When they send that signal, it's gonna, it takes a timestamp of when it sends that signal, and that timestamp is kept by GPS time through the atomic clocks that are accurately correcting for the Sagnac effect so that they can keep GPS time. But anyway, what's happening here is it's going to send this signal, and if the moving receiver passes the stationary receiver at the exact same moment in time, the distance derived between these two is obviously should be the same, right? But what happens is that uh, the moving recipient actually receives his transmission at a delay, and that delay is directly proportional to how fast he's moving. So that's a huge violation for special relativity because all reference frames should be equally valid, and two, the speed of light should be independent of the motion of the source or observer. So that's a huge problem for that, and that's actually what's causing the discrepancy in the transformations, right? Because when you get into how these transformations work, it turns out that they have rules for them. So special relativity is built in explicitly off of Lorenz's uh, framework. So everything has to adhere to Lorentz covariance, or known as Lorentz symmetry, meaning that when a law of physics is transformed to another coordinate system, that law or whatever's derived from that law has to be an invariant transformation because it's a law of physics, right? So we're often here that like, oh, all these reference frames are valid and we verified it. But like, obviously no one's been to these reference frames to verify it. So how do they do this? Well, they do this by imposing, these restrictions on it where if a transformation is made to another coordinate system and you're using, a law of physics, C, or some sort of, variable that's represented by that, or if you're using a law of physics that's represented by a variable in a math equation, then whatever law that is, it has to be, invariantly transformed to the new coordinate system, meaning that it can't change, it can't deviate, there can't be any corrections made to it, anything like that. Otherwise it's a non-invariant transformation, and it violates Lorentz symmetry, and it undermines the entire framework, thus nullifying it, right? Like absolute body bag type stuff, because you can't break the laws of physics in mathematics, and the way that they pretend to do it um, is how they get away with it. Because for most things, there's not a way to discern the one-way speed of light. But in the case of GPS, its accuracy actually depends on, really precise measurements and timing of how long it takes for that light or how long it takes for that electromagnetic propagation to reach its recipient from the time that it was transmitted. And so it's producing a really accurate one-way measurement of the speed of light. Now, in the ECI frame, the speed of light is specified by c. So what they're saying is that this is a fixed speed and cannot change. And then when they transform to another coordinate system that has c, right? So it's the same thing. So there should be no discrepancy based on the time or based on the distance derived, because GPS itself keeps its own time called GPS time. So if c were truly invariant and independent of the source and observer, which is motion, then it would then the distance derived would be the same, but it's not, and that's fundamentally breaking, because it proves that there's a preferred reference frame to measure the speed of light in, right? The ECI frame, which violates the first postulate of special relativity that says all reference frames are equally valid and there's no preferred reference frame. And then number two, it proves that the speed of light is not constant in all reference frames. So this has been experimentally proven in 2004 explicitly by a guy named Ruyong Wang, who linearized the Sagnac effect. But not even to get into that. In GPS, there's been several tests done where they're sending signals around the globe or around the plane that we live on, right? And when it completes its circle, what they're finding is that the signal propagation is faster when it's traveling east to west, than it is going west to east. And one of the things I found interesting was I came across this paper by Paul Marmot where he breaks down the math that they use for actually it's just equation 13. He breaks down the math that they use to keep the atomic clocks in sync. And what he found was it's actually just the same correction that they use to keep to account for the Sagnac effect. And interestingly enough, the range measurement equation accounts for the Sagnac effect, built into it. The way that they've, obfuscated this is basically by hiding it in the range measurement equation. The time of the recipient signal received is what's producing this effect, and that's where he was able to derive that. Therefore, we can conclude that the speed of light is dependent on the translational motion of the receiver, because the delay in which the signal is received is proportional to the speed of the moving receiver. And that's how GPS actually works. So instead of saying, we have this coordinate system here and this location here at F5 and a location here at C2, and we can deduce that 1, 2, 3, 4 tiles of measurement between them is how you would deduce the distance. Well, that's not how GPS works. It's sending a signal, and it's sending a snapshot of the time that it sent it here, a little timestamp, and it gets to the signal receiver, and it says it took this long to get here. Therefore, you must be this far away from this object or you were this far away from this object at this time when it was sent, and that's how it's deriving the distance. So huge difference in the way that it's being derived, because, like you were saying, if you were to planar transformations into another coordinate system, etc., the distances would vary. But the GPS being a time interval system actually solves that. Now, the big conundrum that they've landed in is that the Sagnac effect is what's explicitly accounted for in GPS. So you'll often hear that they do things like, oh, we have to account for this relativistic effect, or time dilation, length contraction, etc. They don't have to account for any of that. The only thing that they account for is the Sagnac effect, and they attributed it explicitly to Earth rotation, where the recipient of the signal is either rotating into the signal with the rotation of the Earth or rotating away from the signal. And that's how they're accounting for it. But even that's not valid, because in 2004, the Sagnac effect was linearized by Ruyong Wang, where he did a linear interferometer, just a straight line, basically a straight line back and forth. And then he had it on a conveyor belt going back and forth. And he proved that the Sagnac the experiment produced the Sagnac effect, and he derived the Sagnac effect using a linear equation. And he had proved that the Sagnac effect is not due to angular rotation. It's one of the ways that they try to attribute the Sagnac effect is through angular rotation, not just through Earth rotation in the case of GPS, but in the case of laser interferometry, they say that it's due to the device itself rotating, which is producing the effect. But what my boy Wang here showed is that the Sagnac effect is not due to angular rotation. and it's actually due to direction, right? So remember earlier when I was talking about west to east propagation and east to west, and the east to west is faster. So the way that the ether wind works is that this guy Sagnac here in 1913 had a circular interferometer device that he was spinning. It had 3 mirrors in it, so the light was entering and it would just hit its mirrors, do its circuit while it was rotating. That's where they try to attribute the effect and narrow it down into that, because there in special relativity there can't be a varying speed of light, so a rotating device or even a stationary one in the case of Nicholson-Morley should not produce any fringe shift pattern. But because the rotating device produces a fringe shift pattern, they say, okay, well, this is a non-inertial frame, so therefore special relativity doesn't apply. And that's where Paul Levine came in 1918 and made his own metric tensor to account for the angular momentum on the small scale, so that he could say that due to the rotation of the device, it's actually creating little pockets of time dilation and length contraction, and that's what's causing the discrepancy there. But it's actually not due to any of that. It's due to the ether wind. So the way that Sagnac described it best was that there's a uniform motion of ether wind propagating around us, going east to west, and electromagnetic propagation going through that, catches a boost, and when it's going away from it, or going against it, it catches a delay, right? And that's what he was saying produced the fringe. That's how he equated it. Now when people say ether wind, people, a lot of people think like, well, does that mean it's blowing? Like, is it going to knock over this water bottle? Like, how does it work? Not exactly, man. It seems to affect electromagnetic propagation the most, and that's where the term is coming from, right? So these are repeated measurements of very precise measurements of the one-way and two-way speed of light, in the case of interferometry being the two-way speed, where it's showing a varying speed that's so accurate that they can produce measurements with it. And the reason that we equate this to a vortex and all this and all that is because if you think about a Gleason's map, equidistant azimuthal projection with the North Pole, and you have a vortex coming out like a tornado, right? And say the tornado expands across the whole plane, but as it's going up, it's curved away from the center. So as you get further away from the center, you're going to have less of that rotational speed and that effect of it, and it's going to get higher and further, right, as it gets further across the plane, right? So there's going to be a less less translation of motion in that, right? So when they talk about, oh well, we can derive using a laser interferon, or using a ring laser gyro, we can accurately deduce where we're at on the globe based on the fringe shift pattern produced down to the latitude. Now it's often called a parlor trick and all these things, but it's actually not a parlor trick. It's just a really precise measurement of electromagnetic propagation, in that it has a preferred direction. And that preferred direction relative to how far away you are from the source of rotation produces a fringe shift pattern that's, relative to the latitude, really, for their coordinate system. Now, does it work to such a precise precision degree that, you would be able to measure, like, if you were, like, 2 miles away from, a certain latitude point, like what would the discrepancy be? Not sure about all that. I don't know that it works that precisely in that regard, but it can be used as a reference in tandem with other references to accurately derive a position on a coordinate system based on lat long. Now, obviously, transforming a 2D system to a globe isn't, it's not even an issue. It's not something to get too caught up on, because they could definitely do that. But there's a lot of obfuscation with ring laser gyros in the south, same with pendulums, and at the equator as well. So there's a lot to dive in there for that regard. But to hand wave dismiss ether wind as unicorn farts or something like that, it's not super productive, because this is a repeatable, measurable effect that, if not accounted for, GPS wouldn't be accurate. It would be off by at least 30 meters on the initial measurements, according to Ruyong Wang, who's done extensive work in GPS and with ring laser gyroscopes. And I think that's all I really wanted to cover, because like I said, a large portion of your argument is completely undermined by the fact that GPS is a time interval system and it doesn't require um, distance to be derived in the traditional sense. Now, they've hung themselves though because the discrepancy in C that being shown in the ECI when it's transferred to the ECF frame, that's where they're getting um, their discrepancies, and they say that they have to apply corrections for relativity and blah blah blah. Well, the fact that they have to apply corrections after what should be an invariant transformation is GG. That's game over right there. That cannot happen, should not happen, and is the I don't want to say actual crux of the issue, because again, I'm not attacking you or anything like that, but I'm saying, like, mathematically speaking, from within their paradigm, if you were to try and talk to someone who's familiar with with that and how GPS works, they're immediately going to hand wave dismiss your argument based on the time interval system, and assuming that the transformation, although produces a non-invariant transformation, they're assuming that the calculations provided after the fact are all on the up and up, but they're actually not. There are rules to transformations, and I highly recommend you look into them, because when you apply that to how GPS works with the range measurement equation and time interval system, but they've really shot themselves in the foot. So here's some sources on Lorentz covariance. I know this is from Wikipedia, but it's actually a really to the point. What's it called? Like, really to the point information on what on how Lorentz covariance works. So that's what I wanted to share with you, and take it for what you will. If you're interested in having a formal discussion or further in-depth discussion or whatever, feel free to hit me up. I'm always down to discuss it further, and have a good day.